As parents, we all want our kids to succeed. We want them to have self-confidence, feel self-assured, be happy, appreciate life, their experiences, and just be overall excited to be alive. And we want them to learn skills as well, right? Social skills and teamwork and decision-making skills and just feeling good about themselves. And lots of us parents look to sports because we want to provide any opportunity possible to help our kids achieve their best self, right? To reach their full potential. And I know I've looked to sports for my kids, and lots of parents do. Now, sports isn't always the right environment for every kid. I've seen some pretty horrendous things in terms of coaches' interactions with kids, kids' interactions with kids, and environments that just were not encouraging at all, but actually were shaming children. And I think the environment itself actually made things worse for the child. But we can really use sports to help our kids achieve everything. So we're going to talk about how to find the right environment, how to find a great coach, and to help your kids succeed in a sport world. I have with me Jamil Springer. This guy is the creator of Flight School Football, which is how we met, and I'll get into that story in a minute. And last year, the 10 and 11-year-old division were the world champions.
Correct.
World champions. They went to Florida and beat everybody, and they were the world champions, which is amazing for our little city of Montreal.
Absolutely.
And also, he's the head coach at Davio, which is a school here in the Montreal area. Thanks, Jamil, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to give a little bit of background as to how we met.
Right.
So my son's been dying to play football for years, and I'm a dementia specialist, so head injuries is always at top of mind.
Absolutely.
And there's no way I want him to play football. And also he has anxiety, and he's been really struggling with participating in any sports at all. He begins, he quits, he cries, he sits out, he complains, he becomes oppositional, all related to anxiety and him not feeling good about himself. I was reluctant to start in the football world because I know the programs can be demanding, and I've heard not great things always about the coaches in terms of football.
Right.
I called you, and you told me about the flag football program, Flight School. What impressed me so much, Jamil, is in our first conversation on the phone, you told me right away that you understand there's a difference between mental illness and a kid who's just nervous for a game.
Absolutely.
And that you have lots of kids with whom you've worked and coached who have anxiety or depression or other home problems, lots of struggles, and you recognize that that can interfere with their ability to get in the game. And you told me to give you a chance, and I did. And what is amazing is that the first, I think, what was the season, 7 games?
6, 7 games, 8, depending. Well, playoffs as well, so it might have stretched to 9, potentially. But
okay. So my son sat on the sidelines for the first, let's say there's 7 games. He sat on the sidelines for the first 5, crying, saying, I can't do it, I'm not any good, I don't know what to do. After every game, Jamil and I would be brainstorming about how we can get my son, not our son, we don't have any children.
No, we don't.
But he does have a brand new baby, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
How we could get my son into the game. And you had suggested, well, we can change teams, change coaches. You were really, really open to a lot of things. And when I told you, we don't need to change teams, don't change your whole program for my son. And what you said to me was, it's not about the program, it's about the kid. I still get
this is true.
Very emotional when I say that, because I've never heard a coach be so concerned and invested in a child's well-being. And I have to say now he's thriving in the football world, and he's doing
well, doing very well.
Yeah, he's doing amazing. So let's talk about this. What can sports do, Jamil, for kids that have absolutely nothing to do with the actual physical activity?
Well, I think sports in general, not just football, just sports in general, it gives kids the leadership. They build on leadership. They become more coachable. I think that the fact that you can get around a whole bunch of kids, it's going to build your social skills, right? And yeah, it's a little bit demanding. Yeah, you're forced to do certain things that might push your limits, but I think it sets kids up to deal with adversity. So especially dealing with football, all the required skills to win in life, you're taught at football. So I think that any kid that, whether they do play sports, whether they have interest in basketball, football, soccer, they should get around. They should get around, play with some kids that are their age. They're going to grow. They're going to develop. Their social skills are going to obviously skyrocket through the roof. And it's pretty much my focal point.
So when you were saying that the skills that they need in life, they're going to learn on the field, how do you as a coach, because you can't coach every single kid at every level, how do you recruit your other coaches so that they come in with that same philosophy? Because I have to tell you, I have not seen that and my son has tried multiple sports, and some of the coaches have been great and the environments were fine. Others, I mean, I've seen coaches berate children, call them names actually, be swearing at them, some horrible things. How do you recruit men? Because I've only seen men. Maybe you have some. Do you have female coaches?
We're working on it.
Okay.
I'm an advocate for it. I think females should take part in every single sport. I think we should have refs that are females, coaches. Sometimes it's just hard to get them out. But to answer your question, so what I look for is people that are passionate. I don't want somebody that is kind of like trying to vicariously live through the kids, because that happens in a lot of sports and it's just not a good atmosphere. So I like people that are passionate, high energy, and compassionate. That's my number one component to be a coach at flight schools. You have to be compassionate. You have to be understanding. And the simple fact, referring to your son as well, it's like, if you're dealing with kids, you have to understand that there's many different spectrums of kids. There's many different, they come from different backgrounds. And if you're not open to that, then you probably won't fit well in our program, and that's just what it is, you know what I mean? So those are the things that I look for, and I think those are things that every coach should have when dealing with kids.
You talk about vicariously living through the kids. Now I see parents doing the same
bad.
thing. So talk to me about this, because I perhaps over-involve myself in my children's life. I don't know. That's what my husband says sometimes.
Well, I think there's a thin line. There is a thin line.
That's what I'm saying. So how do parents, or how should parents involve themselves enough but not be vicariously living through their kids and pushing them into a sport or a level of achievement within that sport, which is just too much for the child to handle? Because kids will get turned off and just completely turn away.
Absolutely. Now, see, like I mentioned, there is a thin line. I do think you should hold a standard for your child, because sometimes kids, well, every child, they're going to doubt themselves. And it's important to reassure them, like, hey, listen, you can do this. If you have dreams, you can do it. Push yourself. But at the same point in time, you don't want to, like you said, turn your child away from the sport. So I have now 3 boys. My middle child, who was my youngest, wanted nothing to do with football. And it was heartbreaking. For the first 3 years of his life, I'm like, oh, come on, you should try it. We would go to the field. He wanted nothing to do with it. So I'm like, okay, so why don't you try basketball? Why don't you try something? Because I insist you have to play a sport. I don't care what it is, but you have to pick one. When he turned 4, turning 5, he just said, oh, I want to play football.
Okay.
I was ecstatic. I think I might have danced, but I didn't push it on him. Now he plays a sport. I'll push him to reach the goals that he wants, but I always ask him, what do you want to do? Once you tell me that, we're fine. That's what we're going for. But if at any second you tell me you don't want to play the sport, we're done. Close the book. So
what are some of those things that you see parents do where you know they are stepping on that line? And please don't use me as an example, because I was texting you after the game.
the texting I don't mind, but that's different because we're trying to find something, right? So we're game planning, and that I'm okay with. I think the parent who doesn't let the coaches coach, those are the ones that are kind of like, okay, you got to relax a little bit, trust the process. You could always tell the coaches who are watching the game, well, the parents, are watching the game take part, and they're clenching on the sidelines or they're yelling underneath their breath, and those are things that for coaches, it's a lot to deal with, because we're trying to get through to your child and he's looking over his shoulder every 2 seconds to get your approval, and it becomes a conflict of interest. And I think that if you're a parent, you've got to let your kids live their life. They've got to figure it out. And on the on the football field, basketball court, you got to let them do their thing. And that's.
It's a hard balance, I find. And I mean, yesterday I was just telling you right before we started that my son had a hard moment last night because he was put in a new position that he didn't know what he was supposed to do.
Right.
He got very upset. He came running off to us and he was crying. And then I was telling him, go back, go back, go back. And he was like, no, no, no. So then what do I do? Do I take him? Do I walk on the field? I just waited. The coach ended up coming over. And as soon as he came over, my husband and I just completely walked away.
Right, and let him handle it.
And
that is what is best to do, to be honest.
Because I don't know, do we say go, go, go and say you're going to be in trouble if you don't get in the game? I mean, how far do parents go?
I think you have to judge it Obviously there's certain boundaries you don't want to push, but you kind of sometimes have to push them to see how far you can go. But you don't want, especially in your son's situation, he's fallen in love with the sport. So you don't want to take that away from him, because that's kind of his skateway, right? That's what he goes to. So I don't think you want to push too much, but you also have to have some resilience and say, listen, like, you've got to do this. This is for you. This is what you love. You're capable. And I think if you approach it in an encouraging way, opposed to like, oh, if you don't do this, you're in trouble, he's going to adapt to it. He's going to get back into the swing of things. And
so what some of the things I've noticed in terms of the negative coaching that I've seen, as I said, my son wanted to play baseball for a while, and we went to one particular program, and we only sat on the side to watch. I told my son after, he's like, yeah, well, maybe I'll play. I'm like, there is no way I'm putting you in that coach's hands. He was horrible. He was so mean to those children. He was calling them sissies and babies, and you throw like a girl, and what's wrong with you? I was stunned. And the parents were just sitting there, and nobody was doing anything. So, two-part question. One is, what is a parent's role if you see a coach who clearly is being, in my opinion, that was abusive?
Right.
Second, coach to coach, how would you intervene if you saw a coach doing that? Do you step in?
Well, it's a tricky question, actually, because I have two perspectives. I have the perspective of me playing in sports, and the things that I've endured and things that I had to deal with. And I used to hear every single word, especially when I was playing college ball. I'd hear everything. I was called every single possible word. But the thing is, in the moment, it was like, okay, no, I've got to toughen it out. But now, as an adult, looking back on things, this is mental abuse. Realistically, that's what it is, And I think when you're dealing with kids, you can't do that. There can't be a stigma of, oh, if you don't do this, you're incapable, you're inadequate, because now a kid is going to think that, he's going to embody that, and everything he does, he's going to think, oh, I'm a sissy, or I'm a wimp, or whatever the case may be. So if I was a coach, I wouldn't interfere in the practice, but afterwards I say, listen, you can't conduct practice like this. You're going to lose the kids, and then the sport itself is going to die down with the way you're handling things. As a parent, I think regardless if you have a coach your child, it's still your child. That is yours. And I think if you don't talk to your child that way, you shouldn't allow anybody else to do that. So I would hope a parent would intervene, take their kid out. So what you did was the best thing to do.
Oh yeah, he never even went.
No, for sure,
he
absolutely.
Never even went, yeah. Time, I'm sorry, was it 10 or 15? That was 10. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how much time. I get so absorbed in the conversation.
Okay.
So talk to me though about the evolution of coaching, because it seems like there has been a change.
Yes.
My husband played football, and he said that there was one coach who was very much like you guys, just really super encouraging and positive, and it was very effective for him. But he said a lot of the other coaches in the football world were not that way. And it seems though that there's been an evolution in the style of coaching, that people are recognizing that putting people down is actually not motivating.
It isn't.
Have you seen a change over time? I mean, from when you were a player to now?
I think so. I'll be honest. I'm trying to think of mentors that I've had that led me to coach this way. I can't really think of any offhand, to be quite frank. But I will say this, the athletic director at Dalbevio, whose name is Dominic, I've watched him for the last 3-4 years there with all types of kids, different backgrounds, and he's completely invested in these kids, follows up with these kids, and I think that might have been my motivation in terms of like, okay, we got to get this thing going, because there's hundreds of kids in the city that are lacking this support system that these high school kids have. So in my mind, it was, if we can jump ahead of this early, by the time they hit high school, they're not going to have these issues, you know what I mean? So I do think there is an evolution, but I still think that at some point in time, different parks, there still is the bad apples. And whether or not that'll change, it's up in the air, but yeah.
Yeah. And so as a parent, if we're looking for an environment, first of all, let's first talk about the sport. If I'm a parent and I say, okay, I want my kid to get involved in athletics, I know it's a good idea.
Right.
How do we know which sport to choose? Is there one environment that is easier to adjust to? I mean, football is hard. I mean, those kids are doing
football is tough.
That conditioning and stuff, and they're doing these bear walks and these things, and if they're not listening, drop and give me 10. And I wish my son, by the way, would listen like that at home, because I said to him, I'm like, you know what, next time you don't listen, I'm going to say drop and give me 10 because you do it every time
right
you're
away,
coaching. Yeah,
instantly.
immediately.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So how, I mean, that's a tough environment. So how, like, are some sports better than others, do you think?
I'm not going to say that because I haven't tried every single sport. And I'm sure that if you had somebody that did synchronized swimming here, they'd be able to give you a long rant of why synchronized swimming is better than any sport. I think that the number one thing that I would imagine that you want to look for as a parent is a high energy place where it's encouraging. And I guess like you've kind of got to go out and see, right? Like, and I think I mentioned this to you too, is that before you put your kid into any sport, just go and see what it is. Go as a bystander so you can watch outside looking in, so you can see how the coach is, you can see how the kids react to the coach. I think kids will give you a good understanding of who their coach is by the way they interact with them. And if you can sit back and watch that, you'll be able to see whether or not that's for you, for your child, and then go from there.
That's such a great idea, is go as a bystander first.
Absolutely.
That's an amazing idea. And you go as a bystander and you like that program. If your kid says, like my son has always said, I don't want to play soccer, I don't want to do this, it's always a no. And I understand where that's coming from for him. Do we say, but that environment's really good, I'm going to go ahead and put my kid in it even though he or she is not totally on board? Or do we allow them to make the choice?
Tricky question again. I think that, okay, so some people believe that you have to let your kid just live their life. And then there's also the other side where parents know best. And I do believe parents know best because if I listen to my mom 100% of the time, I'd be right all the time, right? So I think that you want them to pick their own path, but sometimes you do know what the environment is you're looking for, and you do know the environment that your child might thrive in. So I think if you put him in there as a trial, maybe 1 or 2 days, see how it goes, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, you don't want to push them, right? Because then you're going to just get someone that doesn't want anything to do with the sport. So
that's a great idea. And what about multiple sports at the same time? Do you think that it derails a child in terms of their progression emotionally or even physical development? Or do you think it's really beneficial? Because that clip that I sent you, remember from, I think it was from Nova Scotia, they were talking about how, you know, children who do more sports, it's better for them actually. Are you on that same page?
I think for physical development, absolutely, because there's different aspects from different sports that, you know, you won't get, right? So it's good to explore all of them. I think you don't want to put too much on your kid's plate, obviously, because you don't want them to get burned out. So if he's doing karate Monday, football Tuesday, Wednesday he's playing soccer, Thursday he's basketball, then when does he get to be a kid, right? So I think that's something you've always got to keep an eye on. More than one sport. I think multi-sports is really important, 2 sports minimum, but you don't want to put too much on their plate.
And I guess you have to know your kid, as you were talking about, as everybody is different and can only do so much.
Right.
So just to get back to you as we're starting to wrap it up, what, in all those years that you've played football, what has it taught you about life? Like, what are those lessons that you think you've learned?
I think the one thing that I've grasped from football is that no matter what happens, there's always the next play. That's something that we kind of, our mantra. Actually, I was watching something you said earlier on anxiety and you were talking about your mantra. So that's kind of mine. There's always the next play. No matter what's happening right now, there's always the next play. So in football, we have this saying, it's called touch grass. It's kind of, you make a mistake, you touch the grass, you reset. So mentally you're just resetting, right? So for me, I think that's what I've taken back from the sport, that no matter what the adversity is, it's all good. There's always the next play. We'll figure it out, you know?
Oh, that's so beautiful. And that's actually on Tuesday after practice, the coach was, because their first game is Saturday, as you know, was in the huddle and giving them this really encouraging speech. And I texted him, okay, maybe I'm over involved afterwards, and I said, do you have room for a 49-year-old old lady? Because after that speech, I want to play on that team with you. It was like, it's just like that environment and the motivation. And he was talking about that is, you know, everyone is going to drop the ball here, everybody. At some point you will. You go to your teammate, you help them shake it off, and you just move on. I was like, wow.
And I think that's important. Well, I'm going to talk about football because that's what we represent at flight school. But for example, when I have kids that come to me and they're crying when they make a mistake or they drop a ball, I said, go watch the NFL. I said, and tell me who your favorite player is, and then you watch, and I guarantee you he's going to either drop the pass, he's going to make a mistake. So if a professional makes a mistake, a 10, 11-year-old or 9, 8-year-old, you can make as many mistakes as you want. That's the part of becoming great, right? So. And
that is how we learn also.
Absolutely.
So for flight school, when does the season start?
Well, we're finished now. We do camps throughout the year. We're going to start back the flag season in winter time, which will be after the tackle season, so November, December.
And you will see us there. So, and how do people find out about Flight School? It's Flight School Football?
Flight School Football, that's our handle on everything, flightschoolfootball.com, Flight School Football on Instagram, Flight School Football on Facebook, and we don't have a Twitter, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We probably should get one.
No, maybe. And you can also direct message me if you want contact information, because my son will be there as well. Thank you, Jamil, so much.
Thank you for having me.
Get your kids in sports.